Sinclair ships QLs, Atari looks hopeful, and Jack is back. These stories and many more on this episode of the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine.
I've been waiting a long time for a chance to say this. Stop the presses.
Requiescat in pace.
Makes him crazy, man.
What is a man?
It's me, Mario.
What a mess.
Get over here!
Please save me.
Welcome back to the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine, the show where we travel back in time to find out what was making headlines in the home computer and video game industries of yesteryear. I'm your host, Carl, and I'm joined again by everybody's favorite co-host, Alex.
Happy to be here, Carl.
Excellent. So, on this very, very late night, as we want to turn back the clock 40 years to May of 1984, I must do the obligatory podcast banter and ask you, how are you doing?
Oh, doing pretty well. Can't complain. Just discovered the other day that my book, They Create World Story, The People and Companies That Shape the Video Game Industry, Volume 1, is once again in a Taylor and Francis Humble bundle. So, at the time of this recording, there are about 13 days left on the bundle, so there should still be a few days left by the time this goes out to y'all. And this time, merely a $20 donation will get you my book, in addition to many other books, most of which are on game design rather than on game history.
And as someone who has been using your book as a reference or the podcast since the last time that it was online in a humble bundle, I can only tell you, dear listeners, why haven't you already bought it in a physical form? Come on, support this man and his awesome work. But if you're like the rest of us who just want that nice, sweet digital copy, this is a good way to do it. And of course, Humble Bundle, you're supporting a good cause.
Absolutely. And it's such a great deal because the book's expensive. I know it's expensive. It's the publisher. I have no control over that. And so getting it for $20 is much better than you can normally get it for. And, I just want people to read this thing. I don't care if people are getting it for a cheaper price and I get little to no royalty for it because I'm not doing it for the money. It's really about getting it read. So please, you don't even have to donate. There's an option to donate some to the author, and it's nice if you do, but I'm not even shilling this for the money. If you want to give it all to charity, that's fine. The important thing is to get the book out there more and more so that eventually, when a volume 2 comes out sometime in the next millennium, there'll be a groundswell. There'll be a base for it to build on.
Exactly. Okay, well, with that being said, and there will be a link to that in the show notes below, I think it's time for us to go straight in to the time-honored tradition of handing out a warning. Remember, everybody, when we're talking about all of the dates in the episode, we're always referring to publication dates of magazines and newspapers, so obviously the news may have or probably happened at some point before that. With that being said, you can also send us feedback, support us on Patreon, and get early access to interview episodes. I've got 4 big ones coming up here very, very soon, as well as the video versions of our first segment, which I thought today was going to be the 100th video version of the 7 Minutes in Heaven, and in fact, it was last episode. So I've actually put all of them up online for free. I was going to do it for 1 week, and since I'm going on vacation here pretty soon, I'm just going to leave them up until mid-August.
Hey.
So everybody can go to the Patreon page where the normal episodes and the normal interviews are always available for free, but also the 7 Minutes in Heaven videos are available until I come back from vacation. Then I'm locking them down again. So you can do that, and it's only $1 a month minimum to support us on Patreon. So, with that being said, let's talk about the first segment of the show, which is the 7 Minutes in Heaven, where our intrepid co-host must play a game that was reviewed in a publication dated May 1984 for 7 minutes, which they have never played before. And we had some amazing contenders. I mean, we had Jeff Minter's Sheep in Space. We had 7 Cities of Gold. We had One-on-One, Zaxxon for the C64, Flight Simulator 2. We had Ball Blazer. We had Cabbage Patch Kids Adventures. I still can't imagine why you didn't want to play that one. We had Horace Goes Skiing on the C64 because, yeah, that was a port the world needed. Sorry, yeah, the Horace games. Don't get me started. I know, Specky people. I know. He has a very special place in your hearts. Pitfall 2, Cosmic Tunnels, which is not really a remarkable game except for the fact that, I played an ungodly amount of that as a kid. And, of course, Forbidden Forest, which would have been time-honored survival horror classic. But you, sir, you decided to go with something a little bit more high-tech.
Indeed. Rescue on Fractalus.
And I'm kind of surprised you hadn't played this one before.
Nope, never did. And just for some clarification here, I want to do this before the 7 Minutes in Heaven segment. For the people that are being like, this is the May 1984 episode, what the heck are you people doing? That game did not come out in 1984. And you would be absolutely correct. But we have to remember that we are going by when these games were reviewed, and at the time, both Ball Blazer and Rescue on Fractalus were meant to be part of the fall lineup for the Atari 5200. And then some events that we will talk about in future jumps kind of happened, and then there was no fall lineup for the Atari 5200. So they didn't come out on computer platforms until 85 and didn't make it to the 5200 until 1986. But they were pretty much ready to go and were reviewed in 1984.
Yes, and that'll be a whole big story we get to a little bit later. But, so that's where we're going to go in right now. So, sir, are you ready to do some rescuing on such a thing known as a Fractalus?
Let's do this thing.
Excellent.
All right, air jocks, listen up. You all know where we stand. The guys on the Ether Corps may be holding back those stinking jaggies, but we lost a lot of good space pilots. Blown to bits in the void. The rest are crashing down the surface of Fractalus, and that's where you come in. We need you to rescue those pilots on Fractalus. Okay, so the Ether Corps turned their thumbs down on you guys when they recruited those spacers. Well, look here, air jocks. They need us now, and they need us bad.
Yeah, now they need it.
Now, this mothership's bound toward booster range for Fractalus. Down there is where it gets sticky. The Jaggies have packed the planet with remote control weaponry and suicide saucers. There may even be troops. That's all we know. Now, suit up. You're the only ones who can pull this off. Some of those pilots have been down there a long time. Thumbs up, Fly Guys. Going out, get us a future.
Welcome back, Alex, from your 7 Minutes in Heaven. So, for the uninitiated, how would you describe Rescue on Fractalus based on your 7 minutes with the game?
Well, it is something of a space simulator type game in the vein of a Star Raiders or something like that. But instead of blasting the Xylons in open space, you are descending to a planet to rescue downed pilots while avoiding and occasionally shooting at various enemies from the Jaggy Empire that are attempting to stop you in this endeavor.
Very cool. And now, are they using vectors, or what do the graphics look like?
Well, the graphics are kind of very pixelated because they are using fractals, hence Rescue on Fractalus. Lorne Carpenter, one of the great gurus of the Lucasfilm computer graphics division. He was never part of Lucasfilm Games, but he helped out a little bit on the early Lucasfilm Games products, came up with an algorithm to generate these landscapes and fractals. And so it's a remarkable achievement. I mean, the frame rate is somewhat slow, and the graphics are very pixelated because there's definitely not enough horsepower in there to do any anti-aliasing. But you get these mountainous landscapes that would otherwise be quite impossible on a system like the 5200.
Yeah. I mean, it is an unbelievably impressive look and feel, especially for the time.
Yeah.
And we also saw it when you do pick up these pilots and they're running towards your ship. I mean, it's proper sprite scaling. It's not just,
It's really good. And the controls are really good, too. I appreciate... There's so many early 3D flight sim-like games on consoles and whatnot that basically are like, well, I mean, this stuff's just hard. Just deal with it. I think of, for instance, Elite and the docking routine, or Top Gun by Konami on the NES and landing on the aircraft carrier. It's like, these are hard maneuvers. They're meant to be somewhat realistically hard, and they don't hold your hand, and it can be very frustrating. But one thing that very much impressed me with this is it really automates the difficult stuff with a few button presses. You have to line up on your radar with the pilot you want to rescue. But once you do that, you don't have to go through a landing routine. You literally just press a button and it takes care of it for you. And I think that is more than appropriate on a console game. I don't think you add additional difficulty for no good reason other than the fact that, well, these are kind of hard maneuvers. Because games are supposed to be a little more escapism than that. Unless it is a dedicated, hardcore sim. But that's not what Fractalus is meant to be, nor is it what, Top Gun was meant to be, so.
Oh, definitely. I mean, it's... Well, we might get to Top Gun on the C-64. That's a very different... very, very, very different situation. But, yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly. That's the kind of stuff that just doesn't add up. So, looking at it, technical achievement and all, that's good. Would you recommend the game to a modern player?
I would. It's not that deep a game. I don't know that it's going to hold attention for forever and ever. But it's good, clean fun, and it's a different type of gameplay than you normally see from games of this period. So, yeah, I think it's worth checking out. I mean, I said this on the video portion, but I had to actually keep an eye on the time because I was having enough fun just zooming around that I had to make sure that I wasn't doing 20 minutes in heaven, which would break the budget of the show for sure.
Oh, yes. Our production values would have just gone through the roof. All the union employees, I mean, you just do not want to go overtime with the Teamsters. Cool. Okay, then that is that. And I think it's time for us to check in with our good friend Ethan, the warden of the Department of Corrections, to find out what we got wrong in our April 1984 jump.
Hello, this is a prepaid collect call from
the Department of Corrections.
This call is subject to recording and monitoring. To accept charges, press 1. You may start the conversation now.
Welcome back, Ethan. So, before we get started...
No, it's a welcome back to you, Carl and Alex, for you have returned from the front lines of the Eurasian War. How was it out there?
I don't know. Let me check the newspaper yesterday, and I'll tell you.
Indeed. I'm not sure we're authorized to comment without further briefing from the Ministry of
Yes, very, very, very wise of you, Mr. Alex. Welcome to the Department of Corrections for April 1974. We'll start off with a comment for Mr. Alex.
Mm.
So you went into the whole thing about Sega Enterprises Incorporated.
Right.
But there's one part you always miss.
Mm.
So this whole thing with the makeup company and everything, it seems to have happened because it was reported in the SEC docket stuff and all those things. But that company went defunct at some point. And then there was a new company that was just called Sega Enterprises Incorporated from the start that was founded. And that was the company that actually persisted through this period.
Yeah, there's probably another layer of corporate shenanigans in there somewhere, but yeah, Sega's annual report and the SEC stuff all talk about what I said, and you can get in serious trouble for making that stuff up. So,
yeah, if I had to guess
probably,
what happened,
yeah, go ahead.
Then it would be that was an initial thing, and then they found that there's some kind of problem with the corporate, with how that was set up in a corporate sense. So they ultimately just founded a new company that absorbed all those assets.
Yep, that wouldn't surprise me at all if there were another step there, but yeah.
So, April 1974, that's where we are going back to. I hope you all have your numbers.
Yeah, I think
because otherwise you will not be registered. And if you're not registered, then you know what happens.
No?
Don't even need to say it.
Okay.
Don't even need to say it. Okay, so Carl, you were discussing, I believe this was the Mirko game challenge, and I think you were mixing the concept of a free game with free play in that, because you kind of went interchangeably on them, but as we know, they are very different concepts.
Yeah, well, and this is where they were talking about free game in their language. So in the magazine and in their ads, they talk about it as a free game. And if you can beat the machine and win a free game, ensures a continuous cash flow. So it's the extent, and they also call it an extended play option. So yeah, I'm sorry if I called it free play, which is usually referred to just turning off the fact that you have to put in coins to make the machine go. But yeah, they talked about free game. Did I say free play?
At some point,
in
yes.
the episode? Okay, then yeah, I got that wrong.
You use them both,
yeah.
And you're using them kind of in an interchangeable way. So, just for clarification, we are talking about a free game.
Gotcha. Yes.
Then the time machine rolls forward to April 1984. So, you... Oh.
No, sorry. Okay. I just checked the trade again. In their ad material, Mirko called it a free game, but in the actual trades, they called it free play at one point. And that's where the back and forth came in. Sorry. Okay, I just checked. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Damn those trades! Why didn't they know how to talk about this properly when it was something that was brand new?
Yeah. I mean, not that free play was brand new at the time, but
that's true. Yeah.
All these things are shifting and changing. But we go forward to April 1984, and you called Atari Atari the parent of Pizza Time Theater, but technically Atari was never the parent of Pizza Time Theater. It was always a subsidiary of Warner. When it was founded as a corporation. It was a project under Atari, but the corporation was never part of Atari.
Gotcha. Well, and that's actually going to dovetail into a story we're going to talk about today, which, will be interesting. But yeah, so, okay, that's cool.
Yep, that's fine.
Warner makes sense.
And we have a correction from SM Oliva, who returns yet again to the Department of Corrections. He noted that Top View is not a GUI.
Yeah, that's true. It is object-oriented, it is multitasking, and it is even windowing, but it is not a GUI.
Very true.
There you are. Now let's discuss a little bit about Mr. Alan Kay here. Alex brought up the quote, I don't know where exactly this is from, but that Alan Kay said that his time at Atari was the least productive of his professional career. I think he's being a little cavalier here because I'm pretty sure that he's aware that the VR stuff he did at Atari eventually led to VPL. If I had to assume, he knows that was part of it.
That was stuff going on under him, but he wasn't the primary mover of it within the R&D within the R&D group. I'm sure he's exaggerating a little bit for effect. I agree, but he clearly was dissatisfied with his time there.
I wish I could talk to him and get some more specifics on that, but
Indeed.
He's a hard man to reach, except that he does answer questions on Quora, strangely enough. And this dovetails into the next thing of what exactly he did at Apple.
Yes.
And this is an interesting thing that, he gets kind of characterized as the guy who is all about miniaturization and that sort of stuff. But really, his passion was the small talk language, which is one of the first object-oriented programming languages. And that's basically what he built his entire career after Xerox around. So what he was doing at Apple was primarily related to that.
Okay.
Porting the small talk language over to their various systems and whatnot. Yeah, even his recounting of what went on at Park is called The History of Small Talk. Everything else is secondary. He does talk about all the other little miniaturization stuff he was doing, but it is very much on the margins compared to this thing about programming, because his thesis was very much that people needed to learn how to program in a more user-friendly way. Like, that's the kind of stuff that he was that was his philosophy. It's not just about, getting people to point the clicker and do the thing. No, he wanted people to he wanted to use that in order for people to go underneath the machine.
Sure.
Makes sense. There will be a link in the show notes where he describes a little bit about what he did at Apple in Quora.
Perfect. Yeah, he'll also answer on Twitter sometimes. You got tweeted at by him once.
All right. I forgot about that.
Yeah, asking about Space War in Utah.
No, that was on Quora.
Oh, that was on Quora.
Yeah.
Okay, but I know he also tweeted at you once, I seem to recall.
I do not remember. But anyways, that is what it is. Then we must talk about CED. I know this is something that not everybody wants, but we must talk about it. The capacitive electronic disc. Even though Carl has still not brought up the Halcyon yet, this is a very important point in the Halcyon story, because originally it was supposed to use CED, but then when they announced the CED's cancellation, they realized, we have to go to Laserdisc, because otherwise we're not going to get, the support that we need in order to actually sell this product. So, Carl, keep an eye out for Halcyon stuff, because you're already almost through the year and you still haven't talked about the Halcyon.
I know it's coming. It's coming. We just don't have there's no news on it yet. It hasn't shown up in any of the magazines yet. Now, Summer CES may actually be a showing, but
it was at the Winter CES too. So that's why I'm surprised.
That's weird, apparently nobody talked about it. We're actually going to talk today about a lengthy article. It's like a 6-page article about games at the Winter CES that appeared in Creative Computing, and the Halcyon is nowhere to be found in that article.
Well, they don't want you to call it a game. That's the thing.
Yeah, but if it was there, nobody's talking about it. Or maybe they just showed it behind closed doors. I'm not sure.
No, it was 100% in the open. I have many articles on this. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it was on the margins of the stuff that the game magazines would have been interested in. So that will do it for April 1984. Return to your bunks, fine soldiers, and always remember, don't think about worldly pleasures.
Ethan, as always, thank you for your service.
And bye.
All right. Of course, we appreciate the Department of Corrections for the corrections, but it's also good to be reminded that the DOC is also a great place to get some elaboration from time to time. So particularly appreciated the Alan Kay insights, which I'm not surprised that Ethan had handy because... it's a little tangential to my research just because most of it wasn't video game history, but it's still fascinating computer stuff. So glad we could get that question answered with a little more in a little more depth from the last episode with the help of the DOC.
Of course, and because we can't forget how many tangential issues really do touch video games.
Mm-hmm.
And so I know some people are like, oh, you're going too far into one tangent or the other from time to time. But you kind of have to. You can't explain it otherwise.
At least that's what Carl tells himself when he is once again lamenting the fact that he has been recording for 20 hours.
Just saying. We've got 107 minutes in heavens, okay? I still remember Peter, the OG, everybody's favorite co-host, complaining at some point when we had like 15 of those. He was like, I'd mentioned one of the previous games, and he was like, Carl, I don't remember. You make me play so many games. Yeah. Oh, well. So, let's turn on the time machine then. And head back not 40 years, but we first have to head back 50 years to May of 1974.
1974. You'll talk to the computer. After the eyes flash.
Welcome back to May of 1974. Alex, what's our first headline?
New York court rules pinball is a game of skill.
A Manhattan appellate court has ruled that pinball is a game of skill, not a game of chance. This decision invalidates local ordinances prohibiting the games based on them being of chance, but does not affect those that regulate the games when offering prizes or free games.
Yes. This is kind of the beginning of the fight, near the beginning of the fight that's going to be going on in New York for a while. Because the New York Court of Appeals is going to get a hold of this case. And in another year or so, we'll be discussing how this part of things doesn't quite pan out, which is why you get the famous city council hearing and Roger Sharp and calling a shot and all of that a bit later. But yeah, there's really some tension going on here right now because New York City is broke, y'all. It is dead broke.
Yep.
And the need to get money from anywhere possible has been eroding some views on pinball. I mean, yes, the game of pinball has changed and all of this other stuff too. And a whole new generation that grew up with the games is, in power and, all of that stuff. But also New York is broke. And if you let people install pinball machines, you can get money for that. So they had the city had originally acquiesced and started allowing that. Then the police got all hot and bothered about it. And so they were like, haha, just kidding, presumably because you don't mess with the police union, especially when your city's broke. So reneged on that. So there was a lot of games were granted licenses, and then when it came time to renew that, the court reneged. Or not the court, I'm sorry, the city reneged.
City.
and then it presumably went to the Supreme Court, and I don't know how the Supreme Court ruled, but this is the appellate division, because New York, for those who don't know, have to be different from everybody else. Their trial court is called the Supreme Court. Their Court of Appeals is called the Appellate Division of the Supreme Court, and their Supreme Court is called the Court of Appeals, because of course it is. That always used to confuse me, when I was really young, watching Law and Order. It's like, they say these are Supreme Court cases, but these are trials. What's going on? And it's just New York. So this is only the second level. It will be going to the Court of Appeals, and we'll just have to see what happens there in 1975.
Yeah, we still have a little ways to go, but this was a fun one. And it's also interesting to note that this month there was also a notice that the film version of Tommy has started filming. Mm-hmm. So the movie Tommy, the pinball wizard, is being filmed. So, we will see whether or not that has an effect on public perceptions of pinball.
Absolutely.
Maybe it wasn't just the city being broke. Maybe Tommy did it.
Maybe. No, it definitely helped change the perception. But, I think the city was so desperate that they were going to legalize. They were going to legalize almost anything at this point that they could charge a licensing fee for.
I was being sarcastic. I do not believe the movie Tommy influenced this regulation.
Well, but I don't think it influenced the regulation specifically, but it was a big part of influencing public perception about pinball, which was also shifting and which was also important to the overall legitimization of pinball, even beyond just regulations, but the public being less, upset about pinball. So, I mean, it is part of the stew, but I realize you were being sarcastic. But
yes.
But
I was talking to Ethan, really. That's what I was doing.
but opinions on coin-op games are changing. Things like Tommy are part of that, and so are shopping mall arcades, which is why Atari opens another game center.
Atari has announced their third game center in San Leandro, California. The game center will be part of their Atari Leisure Time Game Center concept of themed centers where the games are integrated into the decor with custom cabinets.
Mm-hmm. And, of course, these are, designed for shopping mall locations. That's kind of the new Wild West in game operation, which is why you are finding some manufacturers going into those spaces and kind of bucking the traditional three-tiered system a little bit in doing so. And Atari is definitely one of those.
Yeah, there's actually a notice. I didn't put it in the notes today, but Bally also announces that they've purchased one of these chains, one of these mall arcade chains.
Okay, now that should have been a headline, Carl. I'm disappointed.
That should have been a headline?
That's important.
Well, since Bally was kind of diversified or getting diversified, I didn't think that this was a big deal. But
Aladdin's
if
Castle.
you want, it's not Aladdin's Castle yet.
Carousel.
No, this is a different one.
Carousel.
This is one second. I will pull it up and tell you.
If it's American Amusements, it is Aladdin's Castle.
Oh! I think that is. I was
sure
expecting
74 is when they bought Aladdin's Castle.
Okay, then I think we do have a major story here that I have overlooked because
we need to make that headline.
Let's see. I'm scrolling through here to find it. Bally buys big American amusement Chicago arcade.
Okay, so it's not Aladdin's Castle.
Yeah, this is why I didn't think so. Bally has acquired all of the stock of American Amusements Inc. of Chicago, Illinois.
No, that is Aladdin's Castle.
That is
American Amusements Inc.
Okay,
that's Aladdin's Castle.
Okay, so this is Aladdin's Castle. Okay, so I guess we have to now report on this. So I am going to announce that Bally Manufacturing reported, I'm just going to read it, it has concluded the acquisition of a domestic coin-operated arcade operator and an overseas distributor. So that's a separate story, but Bally has acquired all of the stock of American Amusements, Inc. of Chicago, Illinois, reported to be one of the leading quality shopping mall arcade operators in the United States. This new acquisition will be merged with Carousel Time Incorporated, Bally's wholly owned subsidiary. Jules Millman, originator and developer of American Amusements, will, as of the date of the acquisition, serve in the capacity of president of Carousel Time and direct the expanded operations of the company. And then the second story was that they purchased Wolf Automaten GmbH and Co. Handel KG of Hanover, West Germany, a Lower Saxony-based major distributor of coin-operated gaming and amusement equipment.
Yes.
Okay, so we have the purchase of Aladdin's Castle by Bally.
That is correct, because the company was actually American Amusements, but the arcades were branded Aladdin's Castle. And then, as the article said, they merged that in with Carousel Time because Bally was in a massive expansion phase during this period, and they basically wanted to be on every step of the coin-op chain. They were breaking the three-tiered system. They bought a lot of distributors, both domestically and internationally, so that they would have a nationwide international distribution network. And then they were also getting into operating. And Carousel Time was a company that dated back to the 1950s that Bally had purchased in 1972. It had started as primarily an operator of kiddie rides and was largely placing them, in front of discount stores and stuff like that. But then when the arcade shopping mall boom got going, Bally started moving Carousel Time into shopping malls as well. And then they purchased Aladdin's Castle, American Amusements, whose Jules Millman had basically originated the shopping mall arcade concept. I'm sure there was some shopping mall that had an arcade before Millman did it, but he's the one that came up with the viable business model that everyone else was emulating with his Aladdin's Castle arcades. And so this is Bally basically buying the premier company in the business. The press release article in Cashbox does not lie about that, to really get into operating. Of course, Aladdin's Castles would be absolutely ubiquitous in shopping malls during the golden age of coin-operated video games a decade later. So definitely a big news story, because that's a big part of video game history there.
Oh, definitely, definitely. And yeah, I completely... I have to admit, I did that one very, very last minute, just literally right before we started. And so, yeah, I dropped the ball. Thank you for catching it.
No worries at all, Carl. Not at all. I mean, they didn't say Aladdin's Castle in the article. If you didn't know that American Amusements was Aladdin's Castle, I mean, I do research this stuff for a living. I wish it were for a living, but I do a lot of research into this stuff. So, yeah, I knew 74 was when they bought Aladdin's Castle. So when you said Bally bought someone, I was like, that sounds like it's probably big, Carl, because that's probably the Aladdin's Castle purchase.
Yep, and so it was. So Bally's getting into the business in a big way. Atari's getting into the business in a more high-end way. And the main reason I included the Atari story here is because there's some DNA from the Atari concept that is got to be bleeding into Pizza Time Theater. Just the way that they're setting it up. I put a link in the show notes to a flyer that the Atari created trying to sell this concept. It almost looks like they're trying to sell it to franchisees, because there's all this conceptual artwork in it about, how they'll customize different themes for the stores and so forth. So it is interesting to read and to look at. So I think I would say that there's probably some DNA of Pizza Time Theater in this concept. Mm-hmm. But I can't say that for certain at this point.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Okay, so, now we've got some big stories, but I think that's it for 1974 this time around. Let's turn on the time machine and head forward 10 years to our main event, May of 1984.
Worldwide electronic violence. 1984 intelligence. Collapse.
An awful lot of product that was inferior.
Welcome back to May of 1984. Alex, what's our first story?
Well, it looks like Morgan predicts profitability by July 1st.
Oh, yes. And this is the first of a series of chronologically relevant stories. This one published in the Financial Times of London, May 22nd. James Morgan, CEO of Atari, has, according to the Financial Times in the UK, said that Atari will be, quote, positioned to move toward profitability, end quote, by July 1st. Atari plans to launch 8 major new products in each of its main areas of business: video game hardware, software, home computer hardware, and software, before the end of the year. He predicted profits by the end of the year. When Morgan assumed control of the company, Atari had as many as 40 product development programs underway, and all but 12 have now been axed. He has moved many people out of the company. The latest was sales vice president Donald Kingsborough, who the Times reports was encouraged to leave the company. Atari has postponed its entry into the programmable phone market, but sees a future for video games, as Morgan predicts the market to be worth at least $400 million in 1985, and, quote, with only 2 or 3 companies left in the business, we can make a lot of money, end quote. He also predicts that only about 20 million video game cartridges would be sold in 1984, down from the 80 million estimated to have been sold in 1982.
Yeah, obviously there's a lot going on there, but as a corporate shenanigans guy, I'm particularly interested at the idea there that Don Kingsborough was forced out of the company, because I don't know a lot here, but it sounds like Kingsborough was very powerful within the company and was at one time considered to be basically unremovable, because he kind of, in the words of insiders, knew where all the skeletons were in the closets. So it's definitely interesting to see, for me, because I wasn't aware of this specific Financial Times article, to see that thing about how he may have been forced out, because, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he was very powerful, but let's face it, sales VP kind of is a position that is going to be blamed for a lot of the horrible stuff that happened, because sales is kind of Atari's problem.
Little bit.
Yeah. But, hey, it's looking up July. I mean, it's just 2 months away. We're going to have profitability by then, right?
Absolutely, and Morgan is not the only one who feels that way, because Ross predicts Warner profitability.
Stephen J. Ross, chairman of Warner Communications Incorporated, parent company of Atari, said that the company would once again be profitable by the end of the year. One tool for achieving this would be that, quote, layers of management and the resulting bureaucracy will be stripped away, end quote. He also said that Warner continues to be committed to video games and home computers, and refused to comment on reports that Warner was trying to sell half of Atari to NV Philips.
Indeed. But it doesn't really matter what Ross has to say about the situation, because Atari confirms negotiations with Philips.
Yes, so just for the timeline of these articles, the Morgan comments were published May 22nd. not just in the Financial Times, but in other sources as well. Then Ross makes his comments on the 24th, 2 days later. And now on May 29th, we are getting this article about Philips. Atari has confirmed that they are in negotiations with NV Philips for some form of cooperation or joint venture. This comes as Warner is attempting to merge its record business with Philips' Polygraph records, which the U.S. Federal Trade Commission is trying to stop in the courts on antitrust grounds. And Atari and Philips already have a cooperative agreement in Europe on video games. Atari declined to comment on rumors that Philips is looking to acquire 50% of Atari.
And yeah, I mean, we know, after the fact from insiders that it's absolutely true that these negotiations were going on. But really, Atari wanted to offload the whole thing to Philips. And Philips was the ones that were like, well, we'll do a 50-50 joint venture with you, but there's no way we're taking this entire thing off of your hands. And that's kind of where the Atari-Philips negotiations will kind of end up falling apart. So, yeah, the negotiations are true, and even that 50% figure is true so far as it goes.
Yeah, and it makes sense because, as we talked about the last few months, Philips is now out of the video game market after the cancellation of the Odyssey 2. We will see Philips back in the game. They've got another they've got another coal in this fire that may end up heating them for a wee bit. But it's interesting to hear that they're trying to do this. Now, on the Atari Tel side of it, we've also get news that Atari will delay the launch of the high-tech telephone system through Atari Tel due to a lack of financial resources. So we're just getting confirmation they don't have the money to launch it. I wonder how that came about.
Indeed. And that's not the only thing they don't have money for, Carl, because Atari announces more layoffs and plant closing.
Oh, yes. And now we're at May 31st. Atari announced more layoffs with 800 to 1,000 middle management employees being furloughed or laid off. The exact numbers were not released. Atari also announced the closing of its Hong Kong manufacturing plant that it operated jointly with Wong Electronics and was primarily responsible for making 800XL computers. Production will be consolidated in Atari's Taiwan facilities. Now, and this is a structure, again, Wong Electronics will be... That's an interesting company in and of itself. But this idea that they're leaving Hong Kong and going to Taiwan, which nowadays we're all like, well, Taiwan, yeah, that's where you make all the chips and stuff.
Yeah.
That is just beginning to become a thing at this moment in time. Yes. So Taiwan is still the cheapo place to build. It's still a military dictatorship for all practical intents and purposes. Yep. And it's just now getting that high-tech reputation.
Indeed. And speaking of things with a high-tech reputation, Alan Kay goes to Apple.
We reported last month that computer visionary Alan Kay had left Atari. This month, the news broke that he is to become an Apple Fellow, answering directly to Steve Jobs. 43-year-old Xerox PARC veteran Kay does not mince words about his stance on the industry, saying in a phone interview that the last year at Atari, quote, was like a war, end quote, and while he respects the new management at the company, quote, I guess the tree of research must from time to time be refreshed with the blood of bean counters.
Oh, I love
end
it.
Quote.
That's a hilarious quote.
Yeah, that was the quote of the month. There's nothing better than that.
Of course, a play on the famous quote that the tree of liberty must, from time to time, be refreshed with the blood of patriots. Just the fact that he's comparing himself to that, in addition to the cleverness of it, is just so much going on there.
Oh yeah, I mean the guy's a brain. That's all there's to it. So, and now he didn't end there. Of his new employer, he said that the Mac, quote, isn't so bad on a relative basis, end quote, but the developers were, quote, a little too slavish in following what we did at Park, end quote. Of the IBM PC, he said it, quote, is beneath comment, end quote. Which makes me wonder what he would have said about a C64.
Indeed.
I just would have loved to hear that.
Oh, those are some spicy takes right there. Not really much more to say about this one, just because in our DOC we already kind of discussed some of what he would do going on to be an Apple fellow here. But I love those spicy quotes. That is fantastic.
Oh, yeah. Great stuff.
And speaking of spicy people, Carl, Jack is back.
Sorta. So, Jack Tramiel has made his first move, and now to put all this in the timeline, those Atari stories started the 22nd through the 31st of May. This is now a story from the 17th of May. Mm-hmm. So, Jack Tramiel has made his first move since leaving Commodore in January. He purchased a 7% stake in a California-based medical computer company, ADAC Laboratories, and is now a director of ADAC. And according to Popular Computing Weekly, he is looking to play an executive role in the company.
Yeah, now, I don't know about this specific purchase, but just in general, Jack said not long after this, and I believe him, that he was all set to be, I believe a version of it. I mean, I don't never trust Jack 100%, but he had taken his leave from Commodore. He was on a round the world trip with his wife. He was retired, and then he got to thinking about the Japanese again, and about how the Japanese look poised to invade the American electronics market. And say what you will about Jack, and you can say a lot about him, he was always very, very patriotic to his adopted home country, and really does seem to have not liked the idea of the Japanese gaining such a foothold in computers as they did in so many other areas, and that's what convinced him to get back into the technology business in some way, shape, or form.
And it's what the moves that we're going to see both today, because there's still some more moves coming, and especially the moves from the major Japanese manufacturers that we're going to see today, would justify that thought process. Because we do know that he travels around. I don't know if he goes to Japan on that short version of the trip that he then cancels. But he would know what's going on, especially because Sam is over there. His son Sam is in Japan. So Jack coming back and starting to make some moves and making some purchases just kind of makes sense.
Absolutely. And this next one, a little break from our usual because we did not actually have a headline reporting on this at the time, but it is still too important in context not to mention because Tramiel Technology founded.
Jack Tramiel has founded Tramiel Technology Limited. Now, it's spelled Tramel. This was something they were hoping people would now pronounce it properly. Yes. Check out my interview with Leonard Tramiel for more on that. And now this new company is founded on May 17th. No idea what Jack is planning to do with this new company yet, but
I think something may be going on there, especially since we are also getting reports that a Commodore exec exodus continues.
Yes, and just so we got the chronology right, this is an article from the 24th of May, so a week later. The fallout from Jack Tramiel's surprise exit from Commodore in January is continuing to be felt as another wave of executives and employees leave the company. Among the 8 high-level employees are 4 VPs, Bernie Witter, Finance, Greg Pratt, Manufacturing and Assembly, Taro Taoki, Japan Unit, and Lloyd Taylor Technology. All 4 of them would become executives at Jack Trammell's future Atari Corporation. Other big defectors are Jack's son Sam Trammell and John Fegans, Director of Software Technology, both of which will also end up at Atari. Were they fired or did they quit? Commodore CEO Marshall Smith said that the departures were part of, quote, internal restructuring, end quote, and that the organization has been streamlined as a result. So, are they quitting? And if so, are they quitting knowing that there's a job waiting for them?
I wonder. I do just want to say, though, you transposed a couple of letters. It's Tokai.
Oh, Tokai.
I think you just transposed it in the typo.
Yeah. Typo here.
No worries.
Yeah. Then again, it may have been a typo in the original. I've had to fix a couple of things in these old news articles. They got Bernie Witter's name wrong, too.
Fair enough.
But yeah, all of these guys are going to end up within the next 2 to 3 months at Atari. So... or at the Atari that will be, spoiler alert.
Yes. At Trammell Technology Limited.
Yes.
Which may have a new name by that point.
Exactly. Maybe, just maybe, the prediction that Atari will be profitable by July 1st is not going to come true.
But that is a sell-off story for another day. Right now, we have very different sell-off stories to discuss as Gulf and Western sells Sega.
In April, conglomerate Gulf and Western sold its entire stock interest in Sega Enterprises Limited for about $40 million. 70% of which went to Computer Services Corporation, and 30% went to a group headed by Sega Enterprises president Hayao Nakayama and Sega co-founder David Rosen. Isao Okawa, the president of Computer Services, took the post of Sega board chairman upon the acquisition to help Computer Services advance into the fields of computer-aided entertainment and education and home automation. Gulf and Western will keep Sega USA, which will continue to develop and license games under contract with Bally, and Sega Enterprises Limited, while also manufacturing and distributing home video games.
Yep, so this is the true beginning of the Sega that everybody knows and loves. The Sega of the 1980s and 90s, and even down to the present day, even with the buyout by Sammy and the merger there. Isao Okawa's company, Computer Services, they were primarily in the staffing business. They would provide the personnel to manage the mainframe computers at big corporations. And Okawa could see that the future was not going to be that, and that he needed some kind of entree into consumer computing and microcomputing if his company was going to pivot and survive in the future. And he had already actually been exploring software deals with Sega, because they started a retail operation of all things. That was CSK's first attempt to break into this new consumer market. And so they had been talking with Sega about that. And also Okawa's wife and Nakayama's wife were friends, and so they kind of knew each other. Nakayama knew that Gulf and Western wanted out because the market was falling apart, but also because the company was deconglomerating in the wake of the death of Charles Bluthorn a year and a half or so back. And they had been pursuing several buyers, including Sony almost jumped in the ring at one point, funnily enough.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
For the same reason, because they saw computer software as one part of the future of consumer electronics. They also bet kind of heavily on the MSX computer, and so they saw it as a way to break into this consumer software field. And Nakayama knew that his company was going to be sold, And he wanted some control over where it landed, so he encouraged Okawa, whom he knew, to go after it. Okawa saw the logic in it from his perspective for getting into consumer software and consumer computing, and so a deal was struck. And that's when we get Sega Enterprises Limited as this essentially independent company. I mean, CSK wholly controls most of it right now. It's going to go public and stuff down the line, but this is really the start of modern Sega right here.
Yeah, and this is an important movement because it really does shift the creative side of it back to Japan in I think a much greater way than when Gulf and Western still had more influence over it.
Oh, sure, and it actually becomes a Japanese company for the first time, quite frankly, here, because it was basically an American company. They even all of the internal corporate documentation and memos and everything was done in English. All of the top executives had to be, at the very least, bilingual, and some of them were English-only speakers. But you had to know English to be a high-level executive at the company. All the company's business was done in English. They observed American employment practices. Like, it was basically, even before it was put under Sega Enterprises Inc. or whatever in the U.S., like, for its entire history, it was basically an American company until now. And the first thing that Okawa starts doing once he purchases the company is puts executives in that will turn it into a proper Japanese company, because his plan is to recoup the costs of buying the company by taking it public. And to take it public, he had to make it a more traditional Japanese kind of business.
Makes sense. I mean, he's got to be able to work with the staff, the talent that he has, and so on and so forth. Plus, they've got hardware out on the market at this point, and it's only selling in Japan. They need to make sure that they're not losing something in translation.
Indeed. Though, Carl, I gotta say, I'm not sure about those plans Sega has to be continuing to partner with Bally, because I also hear that Bally profits plummet.
Yes, Bally Manufacturing Corporation reported that their earnings for the first quarter ending March 31st, 1984 were down to just $300,000 compared to just over $2 million in the first quarter of 1983. The drop is, according to Robert E. Mullane, president and chairman of the board of Bally, reflective of, quote, the deepening depressed conditions in the coin-operated games business, which we first reported in the fall of 1982. Public play of amusing games at the retail level again declined in this quarter, which resulted in a lower order rate for new equipment. The first quarter of 1983, to which the current quarter compares, was the best quarter of the year for the amusement game. End quote. Bally is diversified and saw their revenues overall increase and see growth in fitness and gambling ventures, but as Mullane says, they, quote, naturally hope for improved conditions in the amusement game market, but expect that these operations will continue at low levels as the industry adjusts to the lowered level of play by the public, end quote.
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, Bally is in somewhat okay shape because they have been diversifying. They bought Six Flags, they bought the fitness centers, they bought the exercise cycle company, they bought the lottery company. That's helping them out. But yeah, it's just dark for everybody. And the thing about Bob Mullane is, unlike his predecessor O'Donnell, he is not a coin man through and through. He's been with Bally for a long time, but he's a banker first and foremost. And so he's not really going to have a lot of nostalgia for, nor a lot of patience with, a collapsing coin-op business.
Yeah, and it makes perfect sense because, I mean, they've got so many other ventures going on that, just hoping coin-op comes back, yeah, it's not a great bet at this point in time.
But it is not all doom and gloom for those companies that got sucked in by some form of the video game industries, as Mattel secures new financing.
Mattel, the toy maker riding high on Masters of the Universe and still hurting from its failed video game business, has managed to secure new funding by selling 45% of its voting stock to an investment group led by Warburg Pincus Capital Partners for $231 million, and a new line of credit worth $225 million annually through 1987 to give the company working capital. Mattel is currently carrying just under $400 million in debt and reported losses for the year ended January 28th of $394 million, with a negative net worth of $136 million. This comes after Mattel has sold off all of its divisions except for its core toy division.
Yeah, and they're really lucky that they were so iconic in toys. That's really the only thing that saved them. I mean, video games came very near to taking down the entire company. It was bad.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they were so drowning in everything. And if it hadn't been for Masters of the Universe hitting the way that it did, and I think at this point we're still just ahead of the TV show launching. And that's going to send it even further into the stratosphere. So, I mean, yeah, they got lucky that this thing hit big. If Masters of the Universe had been a failure, Barbie would have still provided some money, but it would not have been the cash cow that they needed right now.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And speaking of companies that are relying on hit toys to try to get them out of their video game mess, Coleco issues new debts.
Coleco, the makers of Cabbage Patch Kids, ColecoVision, and the Atom computer, has sold $29 million worth of debentures to institutional investors, with an additional $21 million worth on the way for, quote, working capital, end quote. The latest quarter, ending March 31st, saw the company report a profit of $4.4 million, down from the $16.2 million from the year before. For all of 1983, the company lost $7 million.
Yeah, with Cabbage Patch going through the roof.
Exactly. That Atom, I mean, had they just not sidelined all of ColecoVision manufacturing, had they had ColecoVisions on the store shelves for Christmas, who knows where this would have gone. But alas.
Indeed. And the word is, Carl, that Coleco backlog is enormous.
We talked last month about Coleco's slightly improved first quarter financials with a profit of $4.4 million on strong sales of Cabbage Patch Kids, and we just did it again now, and stymied by the horrid sales of the Atom. Well, in addition to those numbers, it turns out that Coleco has $200 million worth of unshipped order backlog. A lot of that will be Cabbage Patch dolls, but a lot will also be ColecoVision and Atom hardware.
Yeah.
And this is where the window of opportunity to fill those orders is closing rapidly.
Absolutely.
But also, I don't know, because I haven't found a Coleco annual report, how they're doing the accounting. Because this is being reported as an issue, this unshipped order backlog. Now, granted, it's being reported in Toy and Hobby World, which is a magazine specifically targeting the retailers. So this means for them, it's very important to know how much backlog there is so they don't feel like, oh, I'm the only one who didn't get a shipment of stuff. But, I mean, if you're reporting this after the first quarter, is Cabbage Patch still going to be the hot toy in Christmas of 1984? Will somebody still want an Atom computer in 1984? If I have those orders placed and haven't received my inventory yet, I may want to cancel them. And if Coleco is using those unfulfilled orders in their accounting as basically assets of some kind, then that is a time bomb that they are sitting on. I mean, $29 million of additional financing is not going to hold you up if you got $200 million on the books that are about to explode on you.
Indeed. It is definitely time to make sure the public stays interested in Coleco products. So it is no surprise as well that Coleco gets new ad agency.
Ketchum Advertising of New York is enthusiastic about its new $10 million plus deal with Coleco to build an advertising campaign for both the Atom computer and ColecoVision game system. Given Coleco's current financial woes and rumors about it being in arrears with its previous ad agency, Richard and Edwards, Ketchum has requested half of the up front with the other half upon delivery.
I mean, that's how you do shady drug deals, isn't it? Half up front, half on delivery.
Yeah. This is not how media buys and ad agency contracts normally work. Okay, there may be a little bit of money up front, but you are not asking for half up front and then half upon delivery with no back end. I mean, this is really, we don't trust you as far as we can throw you.
Indeed, or as far as we can throw a Cabbage Patch doll.
It's probably more like as far as they can throw the Atom computer with the printer.
Indeed. But of course, not everyone is getting out of their hole through new financing. Some companies are just going to have to sell out, and that's why Hasbro buys Milton Bradley.
The Vectrex-shaped wound in board game maker Milton Bradley's finances has now led to a $350 million buyout of the company by rival Hasbro. Hasbro, which did not get into the video game business like many of its peers, has the cash and revenue to make such a bold acquisition, which it says may make it as large as industry leader Mattel.
Yeah, no, I've mentioned this before, but Hasbro got super lucky that they were doing poorly. Because Hasbro was doing very poorly in the late 70s and early 80s and literally did not have the money to get into the video game industry. They absolutely would have followed all of their brethren in, but they didn't have the finances. So they dodged all of that and then, of course, got themselves a massive hit in the relaunched 3 3/4 G.I. Joe line. And so now they're doing well again. And unlike all of these other companies that are doing well with a traditional toy hit like a Cabbage Patch or Masters of the Universe, have no video game debt weighing them down.
Exactly. And they're about to have another big hit because, as we reported a couple months ago, they just bought Transformers.
That's right.
Yeah, it's all coming up Hasbro right now.
I was about to make the same joke, Carl.
Great minds think alike, and so do we. So
I gotta say, no one has seen us in a room together at the same time. I mean, just in virtual hangouts, those can be fake.
Those can be faked. One of us could be just a VTuber with a really, really bad filter.
Indeed.
I'm not going to say which one of us.
Very good. And we end our look at financial news. No. Indeed. I mean, I wasn't going to say anything, but yeah.
Yeah, of course.
Absolutely. And we end our look at the financial news of the month with a little bit of retail financial news as Toys R Us sales grow, but not thanks to games.
The U.S. toy retail juggernaut Toys R Us released quarterly figures for the quarter ending April 29th, 1984, showing a rise in sales of 35.9% year over year. Of the $247 million in sales, 16% came from computers and video games, down from 22% of revenues in this category a year earlier. Software accounted for 66% of the sales in this category.
Yep, clearly still moving through that backlog, of inventory. But they're, they are the one, and I know I've said this in other jumps, they are the one company one major retailer that is not giving up on video games. Obviously, they're not as important to them as they used to be, but Toys R Us was diversified enough that, they're making it through this, and they do still believe in the future of video games, even at this date.
Definitely. Definitely. I mean, I remember in the mid 80s, it was like, where do you find a Commodore 64 game? Well, you could still find them at Toys R Us. Wasn't always the most up-to-date inventory, but, I still remember seeing a Gauntlet on there, and I was like, okay, that's kind of old, but it's still there.
Indeed. Turning our attention then to just a little bit of coin-op news, which still kind of barely exists out there. Japanese coin-op makers go after North American pirates.
Japanese game makers are beginning to get more hands-on with the fight against piracy as both Konami and Taito take legal action against pirates in the U.S. Konami is going after track and field pirates, even though Century has licensed the game for U.S. distribution, and Taito had a company making cabinet artwork for the games raided. Taito also sued and has won a $100,000 judgment against Americade Amusement Incorporated of Cherry Hill, New Jersey, that had been making pirated Space Invader machines, and a $210,000 judgment against Entex for their handheld Space Invader games, which should have been $1 million, but Entex's bankruptcy reduced it to just 21%.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of a sign of the times a little bit as well, because so many of these companies, not Taito, because they opened an American factory after Space Invaders, but so many of these Japanese companies had gone through American companies primarily for all of the business that they were doing in North America. Now all of those North American companies are reeling because of the crash of that coin-operated video game business. And so the Japanese are starting to assert themselves more and more and are going to start coming in more and more on their own terms in the North American marketplace.
Oh, definitely. And that's why I included this. I mean, and this is something I should mention more often, but every month there's articles about, pirated boards or gray imported boards or somebody doing something that's in the trades virtually every month since we started the show. And it's not something that I normally cover or add to the list just because it's almost like background noise at this point. But it does bear repeating that this is a constant issue in the coin-op industry. But normally you'd expect the U.S. licensee to deal with it, like Atari did with Pac-Man rights. But here, having Konami come in and do this directly, or having Taito do it directly, like you said, shows now that the Japanese manufacturers, they're not just going to sit on the sideline and hope the Americans deal with it. They see this as their market as well now.
Absolutely. One company that it hasn't exactly been the market for is the British company Century, however. But we are hearing that Century's CVS gets new lease on life.
Operators that invested in the Convertible Video System, or CVS, of Century Electronics of the UK, which recently declared bankruptcy, have been left high and dry for new games for their hardware. The estimated 20,000 CVS systems in the US are going to get some help, though, from Crown Vending of Corona, New York, which has announced their first game for the system, Superbike. Crown hopes to add a new title every 4 months. CVS also hopes to license existing standalone games from other manufacturers to bring them to the CVS.
Yeah, I mean, it's just indicative of the fact that at this point in the coin-operated video game industry, you got to kind of go kit or convertible or go home. I mean, this isn't necessarily the best idea of a way to get into the market, but it is kind of a good bellwether of what direction the market is going, at least.
Definitely, but it also shows that without some kind of universal system like what we will get with JAMA, or a very, very stable company like Capcom with the CVS or the Neo Geo, which you just recently did a great episode on. If all these fly-by-nighters that have been trying to do interchangeable systems. I mean, we also talked about the wonderful throw an Atari 8-bit computer in a cabinet deal.
Maxiflex.
Maxiflex in a previous episode. If with these operators who are already on shoestring budgets because the coin drop has gone down to almost nothing, when they're investing in one of these systems, it's an expensive investment. And if there's no more games coming, that's gotta hurt. It gotta hurt a lot.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And Crown is only going to make 2 games. They're only going to make 2 games and then disappear. So
what a twist. And finally, some words to live by here as bankers learn not to finance games.
The back page of this month's The American Banker is a fun piece about the difficulties bankers face when repossessing property from failed businesses. Among stories about attempts to resell jeans from a failed jeans store or the gaudy decorations of a bordello, the piece is bookended with stories about coin-operated video games. Quote, "We got a quick education to the fact that we didn't want to finance video games," end quote, recalls Russ Pryor Jr., Senior Vice President of Sunbank of St. Petersburg, Florida. Quote, "We found out that technology changes so quickly that these things become obsolete pretty quickly. There's no market for them anymore," end quote. They repossessed 8 machines and ended up selling them for 25 cents on the dollar.
Yeah, that's not a surprise. I mean, we've talked about it in previous jumps, but there were so many new arcades opening, and most of them were relying on bank loans, using their machines as collateral. And banks try to be cautious most of the time, but if they have something that they feel looks like a good collateral, they'll get in on the loan because they figure they'll make their money back. But they were not accounting for the hits-driven business of CoinOp and the rapid turnover there, which, of course, sank the arcades and then left no collateral of any note to recoup on for the poor banks that had financed a lot of those new arcades.
And also, I mean, even if they had known a little bit about the games, the collapse of the secondary market for the machines that we've talked about so many times on the show as well just would not have been foreseeable. I mean, if you were a bank that had been doing loans on pinball machines for the last 20 years, this totally would have caught you by surprise. But, fun stuff.
Absolutely. Then moving on to a little bit of console news, even more barely still there than CoinOp, Activision sales collapse.
Activision reported a large drop-off in their 1983 sales. The fiscal year ended with only $69.9 million in sales, down from $157.6 million the year before, leading to a loss of $18 million compared to a profit of $19.1 million the year before. The final quarter saw sales drop by more than half, from $44.8 million in 1982 to just $20.3 million in 1983.
Yeah, Activision lucky's not quite the right word, but was so fortunate on the timing of things because companies like Mattel and Atari, they realized that there was absolute disaster immediately after that 1982 holiday season. But Activision had one of the hits of the 1982 holiday season in Pitfall, which meant that at the very beginning of 1983, they were able to report how wonderful their sales were, while all of these other companies were talking about how terrible they were. And that allowed them to just squeak into a public offering in March before they had to start reporting their post-Christmas sales figures, which, of course, entered into an immediate steep decline because nothing, not even the hits, were selling anymore once that Fallout started to take full effect. So, yeah.
Yeah. And we can also see here that what you can read between the lines here, because Activision has been porting their games to home computers, that that IP, those original console games, either are not selling very well on computers, or the computer versions are getting pirated so dramatically that it is not a replacement source of revenue. So,
well, yeah, some of that is certainly happening, but they are awash in inventory backlogs as well of VCS stuff. And it's not just, one of the interesting things, and I'd really like to talk to the sales VP at the time, Jack Tretton, who later went on to much more famously be with Sony, with the PlayStation Group, and eventually the head of that group. One of his first jobs was as the sales VP at Activision Mediagenic in the late 1980s. So I'd love to talk to him to get more detail on this, but I've talked to a few of the people that were at Mediagenic in that time period, and they said that they were still suffering from the effects of the crash in their relationships with retailers. Retailers were not giving them good terms, even in the late 1980s, on their games because they had still felt so thoroughly burned on the backlog that they had in the early 1980s. So, yeah, obviously the transition to computer is never going to fully make up for it because of piracy, because of smaller install bases, all of that stuff. But they are also very much still paying the price for the crash, and will continue to do so for years after this.
Definitely. It's bad.
Indeed. But don't worry, Carl. Don't worry, because I am told video games aren't dead.
That is the message iMagic Veterans Demon Attack creator Rob Fulop and his new partner Dennis Coble, creator of Atlantis, want you to know. Their new company, Advanced Program Technologies, will stay with video games as they told computer entertainer, quote, "Video games are far from dead. We think the stuff you'll see in the next couple of years will surpass your wildest expectations," end quote.
There's a good reminder that I need to get back to my email correspondence with Dennis Coble so I can talk to him about this period. We've talked about his Atari and Imagic days, but we haven't talked yet about the stuff that came after that. But yeah.
Yeah.
There are companies trying. I mean, there were companies trying to do this next logical step, and we've talked about some of them already, and we'll talk about some others as they continue to go along, which is, okay, nothing's supplanted the VCS, well, then we'll create advanced adapters for the VCS, or cartridges with more chips in them for the VCS, which isn't necessarily the worst idea in the world. I mean, that's basically how the Nintendo Entertainment System stayed viable several years past what should have been its shelf life, all those custom chips in those later NES games. And I assume that that's the kind of thing that they're talking about here as well, even if they didn't specifically go into that, I'm not sure. But, whether it's trying to do that or going into computers, they had to try to keep the hope going. And under normal circumstances, that might have worked, but not with the way this market has been shredded to pieces.
Yeah, it sounds like they really wanted to stay with console games, but they only released one game under this label, and that's Actionauts, and that's a C64 title. So they clearly realize they have to do something now. After that, as far as I could tell, Dennis goes off to Sente, and then later co-founds Sterling Software, also known as Polygames, while Rob would go off to work on the Nemo project for Mattel and PF Magic.
Yeah, and PF Magic he founded. That was his company that he founded after that. Yep. Yes, and both of them would go on to have very successful careers. I mean, Sterling did a lot of work for EA, did a lot of porting work, had some success, and Rob with he would create the infamous Night Trap for as part of the Nemo project. He was the programmer. I mean, he wasn't the director or the writer, but he programmed it. And then to get as far away from that as he possibly could, when he founded PF Magic, he did the Pets line. And that was his own words. It's like he wanted to get as far away from Night Trap as he could, which was a very successful line of games. So, yep, they're going to be around, just not as partners in this specific company.
True. Now, is the Pets project, that comes a little bit later. He does a bunch of other games like Balls and stuff before that, right? Way before Pets. Because Balls gets released on the Super NES and even on the 3DO, I think. And now I'm going off on a weird tangent.
So Balls was first, but only just barely.
Oh, really?
The first Balls came out in 94. The first Pets game came out in 95. So
95, that early?
Yeah.
For some reason, I have Pets in like 98, 99, somewhere in that territory in my head. But
nope.
Cool. Okay, that's that.
I mean, the games that were actually named Pets may be what you're thinking of, because the first games were Dogs and then Cats.
Okay,
and then the later ones were called Pets, but it's all like part of the same series.
Gotcha. That's where my brain is going. Okay.
Yeah,
woohoo! I'm not losing it yet.
Nah, well, just because you were right this time, Carl.
This is why we have the Department of Corrections. Okay.
But continuing on with this trend of video games most definitely not being dead, I mean, they can't be. There are even new systems coming as Atari announces 7800.
You'd think Atari announcing a new console would be higher on our list of priorities, but it's the 7800. Oh, okay. Atari isn't giving up yet on the dream of a video game console future with the announcement on May 21st of the 7800 Pro system, a game console that can be expanded into a computer via an optional keyboard. The system is backward compatible with the 2600, its controllers, and Atari 8-bit computer peripherals, but not the 5200, and 5200 owners will have to buy an adapter to play 78,000 games. Shipments are expected to begin in July, and the machine will cost $150.
And the reaction from the entirety of both the general and the specialist press is, are you effing nuts?
Well, okay, and we will get to that a little bit later, maybe. At this point, I did not run into that response in these initial releases.
It's, I think it's after CES. After it's,
definitely.
Shown at CES is probably when that kind of stuff comes out.
Yeah. Now, the weird thing here is they announced a bunch of games that should be shipping for the 7800, including Ball Blazer and Rescue on Fractalus from Lucasfilm, which obviously is, kind of weird because it's also showing up on the 5200. So it's kind of like, what does your new system do that the old one doesn't already do? But then again, they launched the 5200
it's controller
with
self-centers, Carl. It's controller self-centers.
Yay! This controller's not fundamentally broken. Yay!
But speaking of things that are fundamentally broken, we turn now to computer news as Atom owner frustration grows.
And we should probably mention, just as a spoiler alert for the 7800, it will not be shipping in July, as we will see. Okay. Yes, the Computer Entertainer newsletter reports that the lack of software is leading to more and more user groups for Coleco Atom owners forming. Sadly, though, according to Coleco, reference materials explaining how to use sound and sprites on the machine are only available to third-party developers, despite clamor by users to access these functions to start making programs of their own.
So what I'm hearing is that there are a bunch of Atom users that are just like, we'll create our own Atom software with blackjack and hookers. And then someone tells them that there's no documentation available, and then they'll just be like, let's forget the whole thing.
You're probably right at this point. Or Coleco is just so desperate to make a little bit of money off of software sales, they're like, no, it has to come from us. And don't worry, the third parties will make sure that if something comes out, it will be from Coleco because they're not going to support it, as we talked about last month. Yeah, so it's just the Coleco Atom situation just keeps getting more and more bizarre. It's insane.
Indeed. Meanwhile, the MSX adopts 3.5-inch discs.
The 10 Japanese MSX computer makers have decided to adopt Sony's 3.5-inch discs as the standard disc format for the computer. Hitachi was disappointed that their 3-inch discs weren't chosen.
There may be some long-term fallout around that we may have discussed in other jumps.
Yes. Now, of course, Hitachi will have one big client, namely Amstrad. But yes, the 3.5-inch. Now, this was curious to me because I never thought of the MSX as a 3.5-inch disc system. There will also be 5.25-inch drives for it, and in Argentina, where I used to play my buddy's MSX, it was always 5.25-inch discs. So, and some people still had cassette drives for it as well. So this is kind of weird that, they're formally announcing that this will be the disc drive for it, but it's already been out in Japan for a while. So so far in Japan, it has primarily been a cassette and cartridge based system.
Yeah, and, something that really doesn't get reported on as much in the West, but I've mentioned a few times before, is Sony was really all in on the MSX. I mean, they don't end up, I don't think, being one of the larger producers of it, but they really thought that this was going to be their entree into the computing space, which they saw as a natural extension of their consumer electronics stuff. And because the book Revolutionaries at Sony talks, doesn't go into detail on this, but mentions it all the time, that basically Sony bet big on MSX, fell flat on their face, and that was a big part of the reason why most of management did not want to do the PlayStation at all. So part of choosing the 3.5-inch disc as the standard disc may also be as kind of a reward to Sony, so to speak, because Sony is being such a champion of the computer.
And that makes perfect sense. I mean, it really does. Now, whether or not Sony had already sub-licensed to third parties the manufacturing of the 3.5-inch discs, and what that history is, that may also play a role in all of this. I don't know how closely Hitachi was holding on to the 3-inch disc format, and I don't know how closely Sony was. Because I can imagine that if one of them was like, we'll let everybody do it, it would have been the one to go with.
Yeah. And in other computing news in Japan, Activision signs deal with Pony.
Activision will be selling MSX ports of its games in Japan through Pony Incorporated, the software distribution arm of Nippon Broadcasting Incorporated, a major Japanese media conglomerate. Pony would later be called Pony Canyon and also publish games in the West under their label FCI. Yeah. And I just did a little cursory review of all the games that these guys publish. I mean, obviously we get the Game Boy Ultima games and stuff like that. It is interesting how they are sort of a bridge publisher. I mean, it's an interesting parallel because this is the same time, as we'll see very shortly, that US Gold gets established in the UK. So this idea of, international companies being like, okay, we're just going to start licensing computer software to distribute, and we're going to focus on games and so forth. Obviously, it's been happening for a long time, but to really just set up a company that's dedicated to that are almost primarily, exclusively dedicated to that. It seems to be sort of the thing to do at this moment in time.
Absolutely. And I think it was probably particularly important in Japan because computer game programming, computer game design was not considered a true profession in this time in Japan. I mean, there were a small number of programmers and there were a small number of companies like Falcon that were, primarily devoted to this, but they were largely looked down upon in Japanese society. And so I think part of this was probably that there was a realization that if the MSX standard is going to be successful, the MSX needs software, but that it was going to be difficult to source all the software that was needed from Japanese companies, which were very small and often looked down upon. It's which in a way is similar to what was going on with U.S. Gold going to the United States. It's not quite the same because certainly there was a lot of quality stuff being made in Japan in this time by Japanese companies, but in the UK it was this idea that the Americans are so far ahead of us that I want to bring in this quality software from the US instead of dealing with these small small publishing houses making use of bedroom programmers and delivering nothing but budget software in the United Kingdom. It's not quite a one-for-one, but it's a similar idea. In each case, there's a reason why the local software developers just don't cut it for one reason or another in the opinion of the company founders. And so they're looking to the U.S., which is a little further along in some ways, to fill that void and provide that quality software.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense here. And it's, for a while, this is what they're going to be doing. Now, obviously, like I said, they're going to diversify. They're going to start making their own games. They're going to sub-license stuff, create brand new games using other licenses. It gets complicated.
Absolutely. But yes, Japan is not the only place where we have MSX news popping off as the MSX coming to UK.
Sony, Sanyo, Toshiba, Teleton, JVC, Mitsubishi, Hitachi, and Canon have all decided to enter the UK home computer market with MSX-compatible computers. Yamaha and Panasonic have not yet decided to enter the market. The announcement that they will be expanding their market beyond Japan is a big deal because a similar announcement has not yet appeared for the US market. Many UK publishers have already started prepping programs, primarily games, including Scion, Quicksilva, Virgin, Melbourne House, Thorn, EMI, Silversoft, and Hewson, with many more like Ultimate and Ocean showing interest. Concerns about the low specs of the standard persist, though, as many can't see it lasting more than a year or two on the market.
Yeah, I mean, I find it fascinating that they did briefly try to come in with the MSX in the UK after declining to do so in the US, because, of course, it was the price wars in the US that almost certainly kept them out of that market. And the UK already has a thriving scene with cheap, locally made computers dominating. Now, I suppose the difference would be that the cheap computers in the US were much cheaper than they really should have been, according to their capabilities, because of the price war, whereas the UK machines are often cheap because, well, if the shoe fits. And so maybe they thought that the MSX still would be just competitive enough on price and that the superior technology would win out. But the UK is going to be a hard market to crack just because there are already so many computing platforms for a low cost that are heavily, heavily supported by the local cottage software industry.
Yeah, and I think that there may be actually an additional element to all of this. While the US has the UK can become like a spearhead, because there are other markets where there isn't really a well-developed market. Spain and Portugal, for example, where the MSX will actually have a very strong foothold going throughout the rest of the 80s. And if you look at the UK, they have one advantage for the MSX that the United States doesn't. They have a thriving computer scene using the Z80 processor.
True, that's right.
In the US, when Activision wants to port Pitfall to this thing, they're writing it from scratch. Whereas the Atari VCS version was running on a 6502, and the Commodore 64 version is also running on a 6502. You want to port it over to the Apple? 6502. All these companies, Scion, Quicksilver, all these guys are going to be releasing MSX ports of their games, and they're going to be basically one-to-one ports of the Spectrum code, and they're going to run, for the most part, like ass. They're going to run super slow in comparison with the capabilities of the MSX, simply because they're going to be very lazy one-to-one ports of the Specky code.
Yeah, makes sense.
And this is something that I experienced many times on my buddy Danilo's computer, where it's like, oh my god, this thing it's running like at like 4 frames a second. Why is it so bad?
Well, at least you weren't out any money since you pirated all those games.
I don't know what you're speaking of, sir. These words you're saying, they don't make any sense.
The statute of limitations has long since expired, Carl. It's okay.
Yeah. But yeah, this was the bane of MSX owners. It's like you'd open up the magazines and occasionally buy like the Japanese games, and you're like, oh, that looks pretty. And then you pick up the European games, and it's like, it doesn't even have the color clash of the Specky. It's just, one color. And yeah, it's bad. Okay. Yeah, because you couldn't replicate the color clash. Sorry. This is a tangent we don't need to go down.
Indeed. But it's not just the UK software houses that are turning towards the MSX. Some of the UK hardware manufacturers are as well, as Dragon to announce MSX machine.
That's right. Dragon Data, makers of the Dragon 32, is soon to announce an MSX-compatible computer. This would make them the first UK manufacturer to join the Japanese makers. The Dragon MSX is reported to be a 64K model with a built-in 3.5-inch disk drive. Dragon will try to get into shops before the Japanese do in September. Philips is also in negotiations with Microsoft for a license to make an MSX computer. Yeah, so
this is basically the also-rans in the home computer space are like, maybe this is our last chance to make a go of something here.
Exactly. They're thinking, okay, we're going to have the backing of everybody else. The Dragon 32 and the Dragon 64 are basically already dead in the water. There is a prototype machine. At least one. I think there's maybe a few more. But I put a link in the show notes. And remember, everybody, links to all the sources are in the show notes. And they talk about what the machine is. The built-in 3.5-inch disk drive is not part of the prototype. They don't do that. And it's basically just your standard MSX machine. I mean, it's kind of dull. Now, Philips is also, I believe, going to make an MSX computer or multiple MSX computers.
They do, yeah. They end up investing heavily in it, and I believe having some success with it in Europe. But they are, at this point, they are still very much playing the field, because even though they are in that MSX negotiation, it's also come out that Philips and Thomson want to set new standard.
Oh, yeah. Dutch electronics giant Philips is reportedly talking to French computer maker Thomson to establish a new standard for European home computers based on Thomson's recently revealed M05 model. The companies hope to also establish a 16-bit business machine standard. The M05 is a 48K machine using a 6809E chip and runs on cassettes and ROM cartridges. Thomson also just introduced the T0770, which has 64K of RAM. The newer system is meant to be the basis for a TV show similar to how the BBC Micro was promoted.
I mean, I can definitely see what Philips is playing at here, because Europe is still kind of ripe for some kind of standardization. I mean, the PC is starting to come in Europe as a business computer, but it has not been adopted there as quickly as it was in the United States. And what home computers there are available in Europe is a very, very fragmented market. I mean, the French have some of their own things going on. The British have their market and have made some inroads into places like Spain as well. But it's really still a very fragmented market. And I'm sure that Philips probably saw the coming of the MSX and thought to themselves, now's the time to standardize Europe. And we're probably pursuing multiple avenues, because they got the Thomson thing. They are working with the MSX folks. But I think Philips sees this as their opportunity. They haven't done a good job of securing a foothold in the home computer space. They tried some video game stuff that did okay, but didn't set the world on fire. And I can see why Philips is starting to feel like they're a bit left behind in an area that's going to be really the future of consumer electronics.
Oh, definitely. And the fact, and we can't forget, we talked about it earlier, they're still in negotiations with Atari.
Absolutely, they are.
They're looking everywhere and trying to see, okay, which tech, because if they try to develop it themselves, they're just going to fall behind. Just buy up somebody else's tech and go for it and use your marketing muscle to sell it. Seems like a good idea at this point.
Plus, I hear that they're making some exciting breakthroughs in multimedia CD standards during this time period as well.
I don't know what you could be talking about. It's not like that whole thing will get delayed for a decade.
Indeed. But that is a story for another time. Instead, we turn our attention back to the United Kingdom, where an Amstrad development fracas revealed.
Chris Hall of Locomotive Software tells Personal Computing Weekly how Locomotive and MEJ Electronics, a hardware house, had to restart the project for the CPC from scratch starting in August of 1983. Only the body of the machine and the specs for the tape drive and a monitor survived, as well as the price point, meaning that all subsequent decisions were almost on autopilot. A 6502 CPU was ditched because Locomotive didn't have 6502 basic code in their repertoire, so a Z80 was introduced. 16K of RAM was the bare minimum for the screen resolution, etc. But unlike the QL, this machine will ship with finished software in ROM. So, yeah. Now, this is an interesting one because I had not heard this story about how messed up the development of the CPC was.
I did not know this either. That is very interesting.
But I did hear a recent interview, I believe it was the Retro Hour, talk to one of the developers, may have even been Chris Hall. And he went into detail about all the stuff that they had to do. So this article that is linked down below, you can read it yourselves, is super fascinating because he really breaks down every piece of the hardware, just telling them, we had to do this, we had to do this, this would have been too expensive, we had this available. But yeah, I mean, when Sugar showed the original box, basically there was no computer in it yet. There was nothing to show yet. And they're putting this whole thing together in less than 6 months.
Delightful. And also, second, your shout out there to the Retro Hour, which does some phenomenal interviews with people from video game history.
Oh, yeah.
Largely from the United Kingdom, because that's where they're based, but not exclusively from the United Kingdom, much to their credit.
No. I mean, for their big anniversary episode, they actually had Nolan Bushnell on there and stuff. It was... I've been a listener of theirs almost from day one and love the show.
Absolutely.
But yeah, so
Same here.
The history of this machine, very, very interesting. And what it's also going to do is it's going to cement the Z80 as the European standard for home computers, with the exception, of course, of Germany, where it's going to be the C64 all the time. But what it's also going to do is mean that the Speccy, the Amstrad, and the MSX versions of games will be code identical for almost the entire software library. It will be the occasional game that gets a unique Amstrad version, for example. Graphics will be slightly different, but everything else will be identical. And I'm sorry, Amstrad owners, but you're going to get so many nerfed versions of games. I'm so sad. Because the Amstrad CPC really can do a lot. That the graphics chip in it is a sweet, sweet piece of kit. But oh well.
Yes, indeed. Meanwhile, competitor Acorn announces ABM.
The Acorn business machine will be Acorn's entry into the burgeoning business microcomputer market. Ultimately, little more than a repackaged 64K BBC Micro with a variety of second processor included models, the line would be rechristened the Acorn Business Computer and be delayed several times before being cancelled in 1986.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's just a recognition that everyone knows that a business computer standard is coming. And IBM is just a little bit behind the curve on getting that standard established in Europe. And so there's this brief window here where everyone blithely thinks that they can create the business standard for Europe. But of course, it's going to be the PC compatible at the end of the day.
Yeah. That, and we can't forget the animosity between Acorn and Sinclair at this point, and the saga of the QL is probably fueling a little bit of this as well.
Indeed, but we have some good news for you on that front, Carl, as I am told the first QLs go out to customers.
Oh, yes, and again, the next couple stories, chronology will be important. Popular Computing Weekly, in week 15 of their wait for a QL, has reported that the first of 1,000 QLs should be on their way to customers as their May 3rd issue goes to press. Sinclair hopes to have their backlog of 13,000 machines cleared by mid-July.
Yes, indeed. And also a moment of celebration because, yes, we will learn a week later that this does mean that Popular Computing Weekly gets their QL. Yay!
Yay! Yes! Well, week 16 was the ticket as PCW finally got their QL. The machine was in good working order, granted the basic programming manuals haven't been printed yet, and they got 8 rather than 4 blank microdrive cartridges. So just as a reminder to everybody, they've been running a tally that we've been talking about on the show for a few months of how much interest Sinclair has earned on their on the check that has already been cashed for the undelivered QL. And it's, yeah, I love UK computer and video game magazines. I'm sorry, but yeah, you can be the biggest fan of any of the American mags. No, personality-less ghosts of a shell of what a proper magazine should be. All I have to say is pick up a copy of Amiga Power. Any copy of Amiga Power. Just go. And then discover what you were missing.
Indeed.
So, their initial review of the machine highlights many of the machine's quirks, like having to press 2 keys at the same time to delete a character, a large number of ports, unique for a Sinclair machine, but they are all proprietary designs, including the joystick ports. Set adapters are not yet available for the joystick ports. A not yet available expansion module will be necessary for adding more than one hardware add-on at a time. The cartridge port is, as we've previously discussed, blocked by a cartridge containing half of the system's BASIC, which couldn't be fitted into the motherboard's ROM. Upon boot up, the user has to choose one of 2 resolutions, depending on whether they are using a monitor or a TV, and a simple windowing system is used to divide up the screen in a white and red side. The reviewer praises the speed of the microdrives as, quote, faster than some disk systems, end quote, but also says that, quote, only time will tell about reliability, end quote. And that, quote, their predecessors, the ZX Spectrum ones, have now proved themselves, and my micro drives are far more reliable than my Apple discs, end quote, as his Apple drive died while he was writing the review and he had to rewrite it on a Speccy. Granted, all of this may be for naught, as the £4.95 price tag for a 100K microdrive cartridge is pretty insane. Oh, and later in the review, the reviewer had problems while using the application software with, quote, input-output, end quote, as the machine apparently had trouble reading and writing to the microdrives. I'm sure it's just a DOS issue.
Oh, goody.
Yeah, this is there's an element of it. It almost feels a little Stockholm syndrome-y, where he's like, I have to kind of try to find some silver lining to this machine. But the fact that at the beginning of the article, he's talking about how great the microdrive is, and then he has to hide the loading and saving as input-output is just, word mincing to the 10th degree. I mean, as a lawyer, I appreciate it, but it is kind of a douchebag move here.
Absolutely.
Now, should also note that 2 weeks later, they have a follow-up, and apparently the reviewer is having more problems with microdrives, as longer files take a very long time to load due to a buffering system, and overall the machine's screen refresh is very slow.
That all sounds great for a business computer for people to use at the business factory.
Yes. There's going to be some reliability. He's going to be probably very, very happy that they sent him more of those micro drives. I tried to look up some more details about the computer. I think I may have even included a link to some info about the QL and somebody running it. It's crap. But there's nothing else to say. It's simply crap. But
Indeed.
Okay.
And now in a little bit of a lighthearted story here of two colossal automotive failures passing each other in the night. Sir Clive passes on DeLorean plant.
Sinclair Vehicles, Sir Clive's vehicle subsidiary, currently testing prototypes of a battery-driven low-cost town runabout, has passed on its option to buy the former DeLorean car plant in Northern Ireland. As we discussed previously, production is expected to commence under license at the Hoover plant in South Wales later in the year. Yeah, if that weird little car thingamabob that he was trying to sell had been made at a DeLorean plant, the historical irony of the whole thing would have been complete. But,
Indeed.
Yeah. Instead, the C5 will be made in the same place where they make similar-looking vacuum cleaners. So, it's all good.
And it will suck just as much.
Only problem is one of them you want to have suck and the other one you don't.
Exactly. Pretty much.
Yeah.
But turning our attention away from all of this British computer news and going back to some games, it seems computer games take CES by storm.
Creative Computing has a great multi-page rundown of the biggest computer games shown at the Winter CES back in January. Better late than never. Clearly, developers are starting to take the action of consoles and mix it with the complexity allowed through the use of home computers in ways they haven't before. While there were still some console titles like Hero and Pitfall 2, the show was host to such absolute computer classics as Commodore's Soccer, Bruce Lee, Seven Cities of Gold, Skyfox, One-on-One, Summer Games, Mission Impossible Boulder Dash, Minnesota Fats Pool Challenge, Minnesota Fats Pool Challenge, King's Quest, and Flight Simulator 2. A true tour de force.
I assume that should have read Impossible Mission, Carl? rather than Mission Impossible.
Oh, you're right. Oh my God. Impossible Mission. Thank you. Oh, I can't believe I screwed that one up. I'm going to lose my C64 card for that one. You're not a true fan.
But yes, it is true. We are getting a lot more of what Michael Katz would later brand at Epic's action strategy games.
Yeah, I mean, it really is that stark division between what was a computer game and what is a console game is starting to fade away here. I mean, it's still going to be there. We're still going to get the complicated, 10 different commands on the keyboard, RPGs and stuff. But it is changing, and it's changing fast.
Well, yeah, and I mean a lot of that is the crash because the action games on computer platforms in earlier days tended to be arcade ports, is what was filling that niche, and with those crashes, that part of the market is really falling away, and you are having a demographic shift here, where a lot of that computer user demographic going forward in the United States, big caveat, I'm only referring to the United States here, which is, of course, where CES takes place, is going to be that slightly older, more affluent, and more educated crowd that don't just necessarily want the brainless action games. And so this is kind of a natural evolution brought on by both economic forces and by demographic shifts.
That's true, too. But I also think it a little bit has to do with what can the computers do? Because, I mean, a game like Hero, for example, is a very complex game. You fly around, different obstacles, save the people, and so forth. And when you think about a game like Impossible Mission, where you're searching through the rooms and so forth, dynamically, there's a lot of similarities between the two, but the restrictions of the VCS are you couldn't pull off Impossible Mission on a VCS. Right. But you're going to be able to pull off Hero on the C64. And I think that extra, slightly greater level of flexibility is starting to shine through here. We're going to have a little bit of slide back later on, I think, once the NES shows up, where, at least in North America, computer games have to be different, or people are simply going to play their action games on here. But a lot of these games, especially things like Bruce Lee, are going to influence especially European computer game design and give us that more action-oriented but still adventure elements, fixed maps, and stuff like that are going to give us a very, very different type of game. But okay, I digress. Now, one thing I should mention here, in the middle of this article, there's several ads for games, and one of them is Infocom's "Would you shell out $1,000 to match wits with this?" ad in the middle of the article. Unfortunately, it wasn't right across from the screenshot from King's Quest, because that would have been ideal.
That would have been chef's kiss right there. For sure.
It was a different page, but that we do get a screenshot of King's Quest, and it's right outside the castle at the beginning of the game. And that's going to be a game changer.
Indeed. But it's not only those home computer platforms getting software, as Mac software arrives as well.
Yes, the Mac is finally getting much-needed software support from Lotus 123 to a whole suite of applications from Microsoft, including Multiplan, Chart, File, Microsoft Basic, and some new program called Word. Games are finally coming too, with Infocom porting all of its games to the system. Yeah.
About time.
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking about it for months now, that there's nothing to load on your Mac. And back when I talked to Michael Dornbrook of Infocom, how he went into the Apple offices and, was telling them, we're the biggest seller of software by volume for the Mac. And some French Apple employee told him, "No, Mac users do not play games." Yeah,
it was probably Jean-Louis Gasset, if I had to.
Oh, really?
Venture a guess.
If there was a French guy that would have been meeting with somebody at that level, yeah, that sounds about right. And so the idea that portability, that flexibility Infocom has to be one of the first players on the Mac is important. And it's interesting here. But yeah, I mean, the first screenshots of my Multiplan in Word for the Mac, it's almost indistinguishable from a modern word processor in any GUI environment.
Indeed. And, of course, Multiplan, which is a bit of a disaster at this point, will eventually morph into a little product called Excel.
Exactly. And yeah, it's all coming. And it's going to be important because it's going to unify. It's going to be the blueprint for how to create intercompatible software, which is going to make the gaming world as we know it today possible. So.
Indeed. And now we turn our attention back to a couple of real milestones in computer gaming history. First, we have the first Origin games get tested.
Caverns of Callisto and Exodus Ultima 3 get tested under the Origin Systems name in this month's Computer Entertainer.
Yes, indeed. I've always had a soft spot for Origin. As I'm sure you know, my podcast, They Create Worlds, my whole history brand, is very much a play on the classic Origin tagline, We Create Worlds.
Exactly, as it well should be. And I have a soft spot for Origin as well because Wing Commander is one of those seminal moments. I mean, a lot of people point to Doom. I'm still like, nobody would have had the hardware to play Wolfenstein had it not been for Wing Commander.
I agree and have made the same argument. And yeah, that's the Wing Commander games for me as well. I never really played the Ultima games, but I was so into the Wing Commander series as a teenager.
Oh, I still remember when my buddy Danilo got that 386, and it was like we plugged it all in, and just that the sound and the cinematics, and you're sitting in there. And I mean, after 10 minutes, you realize, oh, okay, there's this many positions to the ships. You know, it's not moving as fluidly as if it was. But it didn't matter. I didn't care because it was moving so wonderfully, and the textures on it looked so much more realistic. And it was just, it was a different age. And that's when I also knew that Amiga 500 I had was already Stone Age obsolete.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And then our second milestone, another company near and dear to my heart, Lucasfilm Games premieres.
We talked last year about the alliance of Atari and Lucasfilm to create games together, and on May 8th, the first two games of the newly founded Lucasfilm Games were shown. Rescue on Fractalus and Ball Blazer, both for the Atari 8-bit line and the Atari 5200. The games were developed over an 18-month period, and Atari Executive Vice President David Ruckert said, quote, "These are the first in a series of surprising new products that will revitalize Atari and the video game business as a whole," end quote. By Christmas, the games will be available for other computer systems as well.
Yes, indeed. I mean, I didn't, as was clear from our 7 Minutes of Heaven today, I did not engage with the very earliest Lucasfilm Games products, but, their graphical adventures. Love me some Lucasfilm Games / LucasArts. And, of course, the Space Sims, the X-Wing and TIE Fighter games as well.
See, for me, Lucasfilm is still Labyrinth. Which we will definitely have to put on the 7 Minutes in Heaven, because you want to know where Monkey Island comes from, where Maniac Mansion comes from, you need to play Labyrinth first. It is a great adaptation of the movie.
Hopefully I can get through the text adventure portion in under 7 minutes so we can get to the goods.
We won't start the clock until after that.
Fair enough.
Come on. Yeah, that's poppycock. We're not doing that.
Indeed. And then meanwhile, back across the pond, British devs embrace C64.
More and more UK developers are working on C64 titles, albeit mostly ports. Game of the Year Valhalla is getting a C64 port, and the developer Legend has even taken out a £2.5 million insurance policy to protect itself from pirates spreading the game in the US before they can officially launch there.
Yep, even though Britain is primarily a Z80 place, even though there's a big foothold by the Sinclair computers, Commodore was always a much stronger company in Europe, particularly the United Kingdom and Germany, than it was anywhere else in the world. And so we are starting to see that investment by Commodore in the United Kingdom pay off with a decent C64 market penetration, leading to porting of games.
Definitely. And it's, 6502 is going to be a completely different market. It's going to be very interesting as we go through the years. We're probably going to have to do some specials at some point concerning ports, because we're going to see the same games reinterpreted completely differently between the ZX Spectrum and the C64 versions. And it really is just, from as historical artifacts, absolutely fascinating. It's one of those pet peeves of mine. I love ports of games. So we'll have to look at that. And on this Valhalla thing, in case you've never heard of Valhalla before, the C64 version does appear in the US. Moby Games has images of the box and everything else, but I couldn't find any other reference to it. No reviews in magazines or anything. I'll probably run across something over the next 6 months or so, but this £2.5 million insurance policy is just freaking insane.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And speaking of American products starting to make a bit of an inroad in the old UK, US Gold launches with Aztec Challenge and Forbidden Forest.
Birmingham, UK-based Centresoft has launched a new software label called US Gold that hopes to import the best of America's games for the Atari 8-bits and Commodore 64. The first two titles are Aztec Challenge and Forbidden Forest, both by Cosme. Beachhead, Solo Flight, Slinky, Puyan, O'Reilly's Mind, and Caverns of Kafka are also now appearing as US Gold releases.
And, of course, out of that initial batch there, it's really Beachhead that establishes US Gold in the UK market. That's the one that's the runaway hit out of that first group of titles.
And curiously enough, if you look at the multiple pages of ads US Gold has, Beachhead is the only one that got its own standalone page as an ad. It's also a game that adapted was easy to adapt for the ZX Spectrum, where something like a Forbidden Forest or Aztec Challenge would be a much, much tougher thing to port because of the color use and so forth. So Beachhead really worked well. Plus, the World War II theme always plays well, or I should say World War II adjacent theme would play well in the UK market.
Absolutely.
Oh, and I should note here also, Commodore Horizons magazine seemed to take umbrage with the large file sizes of the games, Aztec Challenge and Forbidden Forest, and the fact that players had to wait after beating sections for celebration scenes that took too long and, unlike British software, took you out of the action. The reviewer used Revenge of the Mutant Camels as the prime example of a well-paced English game.
Well, excuse me, Britain, for having games that are so much better than yours that just takes a little time to get through them.
Yeah,
I thought you old world folks weren't so impatient as Americans were.
Yeah, this is really starting to show the difference between games developed for disk drives versus cassettes. This is going to be a huge issue going forward. I mean, the people who tried to play Defender of the Crown off of cassettes or Summer Games off cassette, I'm sorry, but that's insane. And so there's just this slightly different method of developing that's coming into play here.
Absolutely. And one final bit of news about this fancy new Commodore 64 taking Britain by storm is that Evil Dead is coming to the C64.
Palace Software, the games publishing spin-off of UK video distributor Palace Video, has announced that their first game will be a tie-in to 1983's best-selling video cassette, Sam Raimi's Evil Dead.
Yes, and no surprise that a UK video distributor would be going the Video Nasties route to try to get themselves into the computer game space.
Especially if you already own the rights to the movie, then this makes perfect sense. And I really wish I could get my hands on an original box copy of Evil Dead the game. It's terrible, by the way, but I just want to be able to say I've got a copy of that. I've got Evil Dead in every format known to man so far. I kind of want to have that one too. But it sounds like that might also have to be a 7 Minutes in Heaven soon.
All right, listeners. Well, you know what to get Carl for Christmas now.
Yeah, if you can find one and pay for it, sure, go right ahead.
And we end our computer game news with one final story. Leisure Games, or I suppose since this is Britain, Leisure Games, wants you to go to jail, do not pass go, do not collect $200.
UK developer Leisure Games is making a name for itself in the world of board game to computer adaptations. They already have Scrabble, Mastermind, and Cluedo, Clue to us Yanks, in the pipeline and have just snagged the rights to Monopoly from UK publisher of the game Waddington. While plans are for C64 and Spectrum releases, Peter Deutsch, managing director of the company, thinks that the new Amstrad machine, quote, seems to be making a big impact, end quote. And yeah, so Leisure Games actually is going to get worldwide distribution for their software. I remember seeing their version of Clue, for example, at Software Etc. in the States. And they're going to make a niche out of this for themselves for the next 10, 12 years. And it's kind of cool that this becomes sort of a market. I mean, it's casual gaming before casual gaming.
Absolutely.
So...
yeah. All right, turning our attention then to one piece of online news. Games Network warns that bankruptcy is looming.
The Games Network, the California company that just last month announced they had teamed with the UK's W.H. Smith to bring games over cable wires to the masses, has told the SEC that without a major new source of funding, they will have to file for bankruptcy as they are functionally insolvent. They haven't been able to make payrolls since the beginning of April and have already laid off 90% of their staff. Including their two key technical engineers, this follows the demise of Play Cable and GameLine, leaving only Naboo Networks still standing, which will roll out its first test site in Alexandria, Virginia this month.
And I'm sure that will just go swimmingly for them.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it was an idea before its time, just in terms of the network infrastructure available. But then, of course, combine that with the fact that the whole thing kind of went kablooey. And there was just no chance for any of this.
Yeah, I'm still working on editing the audio for the interview with the co-founder. He hasn't gotten back to me, so there's no proper ending to the episode, but we have covered the entire history of Games Network and everything that went wrong with Games Network. And as far from his point of view, they simply run out of money. They've got a shipment of the computers because they're not downloading the games to existing computers. They have their own standalone units, which is a keyboard computer with a joystick built into it. And it's simply it's going to be sitting on the dock. came in, I believe, from Taiwan, and they won't have the money to pick it up, and it will get shipped back. And that will be the end of the games network.
Indeed.
So sad, really. I mean, they had so many deals cut with all the major players and stuff. I mean, it could have been something, but alas.
Indeed. Now we turn our attention to the publishing world, and proving that the adage, better late than never, is so not true all the time, Atom Magazine to arrive.
A magazine dedicated to the Coleco Atom is to arrive in August. Smart Publications plans to launch Smart Magazine. The cover of the first issue promises, quote, 12 pages of game reviews, end quote, and Coleco's Laserdisc update, and 4 easy graphics programs, and special review of Dr. Seuss games, and discount buying guide to Atom software, and quiet your printer plans inside. And the magazine has put out a request for submissions of programs written in Smart Basic, the basic version included with the Atom.
Not such a smart move here by Smart Publications.
Yeah, I couldn't find any evidence of this thing ever actually hitting the streets, so...
How could it?
If somebody has a copy, I'd love to see it, because I'd love to know which games they were reviewing.
Exactly. How do you get 12 pages of games review? 48-point type?
Exactly. It's like, we have Book Rogers and Book Rogers.
And I can tell you the plan to quiet your printer right now. Throw it in your garbage can along with the rest of your Atom, because it's over.
You're so mean.
Don't throw it away. It'll be a collector's item in like 40 years. But, just unplug it and throw it in a closet. All right. But, it's doubly funny. Because, obviously it's funny because the Atom's time passed a year ago, but it's, not quite a year ago, but half a year ago. But it's also funny because right in this period when there has been an absolute apocalypse of video game and computer magazines, you're going to get into this dying field with an Atom magazine? So it's doubly funny. Both macro and microeconomics say this is a bad idea.
Somebody was looking at those numbers going, so many people bought Atoms and nobody's supporting them. We have to do something. There's a reason why.
That's right. Okay, but turning our attention then to a couple of legal stories. Australia recognizes copyright.
An Australian court in a 2-1 decision has decided that the Taiwanese-made Wombat computer infringed Apple's copyrights by including Apple program code in its integrated chips, overturning Australian precedent concerning the copyright protectability of programs on chips.
What I really want to know, though, Carl, is were the owners of that Taiwanese company punished via a booting?
Oh, no, I'm not even going there. Not biting it. No. We're leaving it right there. So, on a more serious note, the reason I included this was to just sort of put us, to remind everybody that the whole idea of copywriting programs is still relatively fresh in a huge chunk of the world.
Absolutely.
Which, just goes to once again highlight the issues with piracy and so forth. And it's just still a very new concept. It's still working its way through the courts at this point.
Absolutely. And here's an interesting story. Sanders' income booms while royalty revenue dips.
Sanders Associates Incorporated reported adjusted earnings for the quarter ended April 27th of $7.9 million, with net sales increasing 25% to $192 million compared to just $153 million a year earlier. Their sales were improved by increasing demand for their graphic systems, OEM displays, plotters, digitizers, and turnkey computer-aided design systems. The one downside was that their royalty income dipped a bit after receiving a one-time video game royalty payment of $2.8 million in the previous year.
Yep, just it goes to show that they're running out of people to sue because no new folks are getting into video games right now.
Well, and the fact that it was a one-time payment, I mean, that it wasn't, that none of these are recurring payments. Like, they're not,
right.
Getting a percentage of all future sales. That's what kind of caught me, that, there's no continuous payment. Normally on a patent, I'd expect, hey, everybody who's using the patent is going to be paying a percentage every year ongoing. Apparently here it's one-time payments.
And that is what they used to do as well. I mean, we know what their terms were in the 70s because it got reported on a Weekly Television Digest. I don't have the specific numbers in front of me, but yeah, it was X percent on sales up to X dollar volume, and then a sliding scale beyond that. It was on a royalty basis, essentially, is how they were normally doing it in the late 70s. Yeah.
And I mean, they probably still have some income, but the fact that they're getting like a $2.8 million one-time payment just seemed like an interesting little story, just to sort of put that into the context of history.
However, Sanders Associates is a defense contractor, so they're doing just fine in Reagan's America. They're going to be okay.
Yeah.
At least while that Cold War is going on.
Not crying for them.
All right. Well, speaking of things that are worth crying about, we end, as we always do, Carl often throws in some human, I'm going to use the word interest, stories to round us off. And we do have one of those to finish ourselves off here, as Battlefield Earth gets a soundtrack.
Yeah, a soundtrack to a book by a Scientologist. Allegedly, the music is written by L. Ron Hubbard, and I guess it's a thing. And I saw this ad, and I was like, okay, everybody else needs to know that this existed too. So if you're ever drunk one night and are like, I need to buy the soundtrack to that terrible movie with John Travolta where he plays some weird alien guy with dreadlocks, and you go online and you order Battlefield Earth soundtrack, make sure that you're ordering the one from the movie and not the one for the book.
Yes, though really, I think for liability purposes, we have to at this point inform people to not get either, and just just don't engage with Battlefield Earth.
Just rewatch the South Park episodes about Scientology. Now, okay, that brings us to the end of our story. Sir, you have one final task. What is the word of the episode?
Well, Carl, there's not a huge amount holding things together here, and some of them are trends that we've seen over and over again, like, financials in the toilet because of the crash. We've already done words of the day on that, or words of the episode. So I think the one thing that I am going to pull out of this is new standards. Because it really seems the theme this month is companies trying to figure out what the future is going to hold and becoming the new standard in their field. Whether that is Atari releasing another video game system in the 7800, the MSX trying to flood Europe, Philips partnering with Thomson, the QL finally throwing its hat in the ring to be a new business standard in the UK, etc. It feels like that there are, or the C64 finally starting to penetrate the United Kingdom. It feels like there are a lot of platforms that are vying for the title of a new standard this month.
That is brilliant as always, sir. So, remind the kind folks where they can find your fine work.
Absolutely. As always, the brand is They Create Worlds. The website is theycreateworlds.com. And the podcast is at podcast.theycreateworlds.com, as well as available from all of the major podcast providers, the Spotifys and iTunes and whatnot of the world. Most recent episode was on the Neo Geo, as you mentioned briefly a while back in the episode. And after that, we're going to be covering a little game called Final Fantasy VII that I hear was a hit with the kids back in the 1990s. Also, I do have to point out, it'll be in the show notes, but there is a humble bundle that currently includes my book, They Create Worlds, the story of the people and companies that shape the video game industry, Volume 1, 1971 to 1982. We'll stick that in the show notes. You don't get my book for the minimum donation, but $20 gets it for you, which is way cheaper than the book usually is. So if that's something that tickles your fancy, you can also find that for at least a few more days after this episode goes out on the airwaves.
Excellent. And everybody, remember, you can contact us, send us emails, suggestions, whatever. And you can also follow us on all the socials, and all the links to that are in the show notes. With that being said, have fun.